Last month, council was presented with a list of potential properties to be identified as nuisance properties under our nuisance ordinance and possibly be turned over to Jared for enforcement on those properties. Right now I'm just going to read the individual addresses off and ask for a motion on each address as to whether to identify that property as a nuisance property or remove it from the list. I think the council members have all gone by and observed these properties, am I correct?
Yes.
And looked at them, so you're familiar with the properties. First property is 419 Collegiate. Do I have a motion to identify the property located at 419 Collegiate as a nuisance property and ask Jared to move with enforcement of the ordinance?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify the stated property as a nuisance property. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second's been made by Councilperson Unruh. We'll do a roll call vote on all of these. Mr. Unruh?
Yes.
Ms. Persinger?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mays?
Yes.
Mr. Erskine?
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mr. Crawford?
Yes.
Next property on the list is 508 Railroad Avenue. Again, I'm asking for a motion to identify this property in violation of our nuisance ordinance, refer it to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement under that ordinance. Do I have a motion to identify this property as a nuisance property?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify 508 Railroad Avenue as a nuisance property and referred for enforcement under that ordinance. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilperson Crawford. Mr. Unruh?
Yes.
Ms. Persinger?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mays?
Yes.
Mr. Erskine?
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mr. Crawford?
Yes.
Next property on the list, 401 5th Street. Again, I'm asking for a motion to identify this property as a nuisance property under the town's nuisance ordinance and referral to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement under that ordinance. Do I have that motion?
I'll make it.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify 401 5th Street as a nuisance property and refer it for enforcement. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilperson Mays. Mr. Unruh?
Yes.
Ms. Persinger?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mays?
Yes.
Mr. Erskine?
Yeah.
Mr. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mr. Crawford?
Yes.
Next property on the list is 510 Market Avenue. Again, I'm asking for a motion to identify 510 Market Avenue as a nuisance property and refer it for enforcement under the town's nuisance ordinance to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement. Do I have that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify 510 Market Avenue as a nuisance property and refer it for enforcement under the town's nuisance ordinance. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilperson Crawford. Mr. Unruh?
Yes.
Ms. Persinger?
Yes.
Mr. Mays?
Yes.
Mr. Erskine?
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mr. Crawford?
Yes.
Next property on the list to be identified as a nuisance property is 511 Collegiate. I'm asking for a motion to identify the property located at 511 Collegiate Street as a nuisance property to be referred to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement under the town's nuisance ordinance. Do I have that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify the property located at 511 Collegiate Street as a nuisance property and refer it for enforcement under the town's nuisance ordinance. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilperson Mays. Mr. Unruh?
Yes.
Ms. Persinger?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mays?
Yes.
Mr. Erskine?
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert?
Yes.
Mr. Crawford?
Yes.
The next house on the property list, I don't have a street address for it, but it's the house located up on the hill on Collegiate that the tree fell on several years ago, that's had tarps over the top of it for in excess of 2 years and it's fallen in. And I think it's bank-owned property, isn't it, Wendy?
I think so.
Do I have a motion to identify that property on Collegiate as a nuisance property and have it referred to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement under the town's nuisance ordinance?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify the aforementioned property as a nuisance property and refer it for enforcement under the town's nuisance ordinance. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by, who did that?
ER.
Mr. Councilperson Gilbert, Mr. Unruh,
Yes.
Ms. Persinger,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mays,
Yes.
Mr. Erskine,
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Crawford.
Yes.
The next property on the list to be identified as a nuisance property is on the Tannery Road. I don't have an address for this property either. It is identified further as the old furnace property next door to Mr. Martin's property on the Tannery Road, right there across the alley from Miss Smith's property. Do you know the physical address on that?
I don't even know mine.
So, I'm asking that this property be identified as a nuisance property under the town's nuisance ordinance and referred to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement under said ordinance. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify the old furnace property on the Tannery Road as a nuisance property and referred to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement under the town's nuisance ordinance. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilperson Gilbert. Mr. Unruh,
Yes.
Ms. Persinger,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mays,
Yes.
Mr. Erskine,
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Crawford.
Yes.
The last property on the list to be referred tonight is 702 Commerce Avenue. I'm asking for a motion to identify this property as a nuisance property under the town's nuisance ordinance and be referred to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement under that ordinance. Do I have that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion's been made by Vice Mayor Erskine to identify the property located at 702 Commerce Avenue as a nuisance property under the town's nuisance ordinance and refer it to Mr. Jenkins for enforcement thereunder. Do I have a second? You can't.
I'll second.
Motion's been seconded by Councilperson Persinger. Mr. Unruh,
Yes.
Ms. Persinger,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mays,
Yes.
Mr. Erskine,
Yes.
Mr. Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Crawford.
Yes.
Thank you.